Good evening and welcome to our fourth CUF digital meeting in anesthesia, a conversation corner between anesthesiologists chatting about medicine, anesthesia and science, sharing experiences, stories, tips and learnings. One clinical session under the scientific scope of CUF Academic Center, to whom we thank all the support and encouragement. This is something to help the time go by faster in times where the time goes back so slowly. And when planning tonight's meeting, we felt the need to make a shift. All our previous editions had men anesthetists as our keynote guests, but women make up an increasing proportion of the physician workforce in anesthesia. So we realized that we were incurring in the same flawed representation, gender bias that consistently underrepresents women in academic and leadership positions or awards or academic promotions. So we felt the need to solve that by aiming to the highest, inviting one of the most preeminent academic and clinical female women leader in current anesthesiology, Professor Jennifer Hunter, MBE, who we are very honored to have you here tonight with us. Thank you so much.
Very kind of you to ask me. It's very kind of you. Thank you.
So, Professor Jennifer Hunter, he's an emeritus professor and senior research fellow in the University of Liverpool, UK. She graduated with commendation from the University of St Andrews, very high-ranked St Andrews University in 1971, and started her anesthesia training in Scotland, Dundee. She then moved to Liverpool, where she completed her residency program before starting an academic career. Her research interests have been based on the pharmacodynamics and pharmacokinetics of neuromuscular blocking drugs in health and disease. Professor Hunter was the first woman to be appointed as Honorary Secretary of the Anesthetic Research Society from 91 to 96, and in 1989 was the first woman to be elected to the editorial board of the British Journal of Anesthesia, and in 1997 she became editor-in-chief of the BJA, and in 2006 the chairman of the BJA editorial board. Also, Professor Hunter was the chairman of the Scientific Program Committee of the European Society of Anesthesia from 2006 to 2009, and ESA made her an honorary life member of the society. Has over 2,040 review publications, very prolific academic researcher, was the first female clinician to examine for the Part 2 of FRCA, and has been an examiner of FRCA and external examiner of more than 30 PhD theses. She was awarded the gold medal of the Royal College of Anesthetists in 2011, and Her Majesty the Queen in 2015 ordered Professor Jennifer Hunter as a member of the British Empire. So once again, Professor Hunter, thank you so much. We're so thankful for giving us the opportunity to hear from you. We were supposed to see you and be with you in latest March in the Portuguese Society of Anesthesia meeting that had to be cancelled because of the COVID-19. So this is our chance in Portugal to acknowledge you and to hear from you. So let's start from the beginning as a pleonasm. Can you tell us a little bit about your life? And how did you realize that you wanted to be a doctor and an academic anesthetist?
Well, I've wanted to be a doctor since I was a small child. I never wanted to do anything else. I don't know why. There were some doctors in family, but uncles and cousins, but I don't know why. But I always wanted to be a doctor. The fact that I wanted to be an academic anaesthetist is a very different
story.
Question. I always wanted to be a doctor. When I was a houseman in my first year after graduation, working in the professorial surgical unit in Dundee, I was fascinated by what the anaesthetist was doing, because I realized I didn't understand what the drugs were doing that he was giving. I thought it was very clever the way he kept the patient asleep and woke them up. So it was only really when I was a surgical houseman that I became interested in anesthesia as a specialty. And some of the surgeons I worked with at that time were encouraging me to do surgery, but I thought that was just too competitive for a woman 45 years ago. It would have been tough. I wasn't competitive enough. I wanted to do what I was doing well, but I didn't have a desire to beat the next guy. And I think for a woman in surgery, then they had to be very, very ambitious. And I don't think I had that drive to succeed against all else. So I don't regret taking up anesthesia, although perhaps if I was graduating today, I might have done surgery. But I've very much enjoyed my anaesthetic career. There's no doubt about that. But as I progressed through the training, you see, Dundee wasn't a very big medical centre. It wasn't possible to get specialist experience in cardiac anaesthesia and neonatal anaesthesia, for instance. You had to go elsewhere. And so I came to Liverpool, and my first job was at Alderhay Children's Hospital, and I just absolutely loved the year there. But I was nowhere near finished my residency. Sorry?
The Alderhay,
Jackson Rees was working there. I sat at the feet of Gordon Bush and Jackson Rees for a full year. I thoroughly enjoyed it. But I never thought then that I'd even be a consultant anaesthetist, you know. I wanted to stay in Alderhay for the rest of my life, but that couldn't be. I had to finish my training. And then as it came towards the end of my training, all of which I'd enjoyed, I realized I didn't just want to be a consultant anaesthetist. And towards the end of my training, I was starting to teach undergraduates and postgraduates. And I thought I was enjoying this teaching side. I had no training.
Being a woman, you said that you were pressed to choose surgery by your fellows, and you felt that you didn't want to get on that ivory tower of some specialties that are quite competitive and violent.
And you'd been very isolated as a woman. There were very few women at the top in surgery then.
There are several reasons cited in the literature for this disparity in gender, and one of it is that the unsupportive work environments that's in some specialties you may have, and you thought it was not the kind of area that you would like to work in, and so you prefer teaching?
Yes, well, in fact, I never found any resistance as a woman during my training in anaesthesia, none at all. In the health service in Britain, I saw no resistance in my specialty. And I've always tried to encourage women in anaesthesia and help them on the way. But when I started as a consultant in anaesthesia, there were about 20% of consultants in Britain were female in anaesthesia, but only about 3% in surgery. There was a big difference, you see.
Yes.
And so you didn't have to do anything exceptional to succeed as a woman in anaesthesia, but you did in surgery then.
Yes.
You had to be.
That's amazing.
But things have been much slower to improve for women in surgery in Britain, but they are now. They are now. They got to more than 50% of medical students in the UK are women now. So they've got to accept it.
Yes,
but I saw women of my generation, as I trained in anaesthesia, I saw women who were my strict contemporaries in surgery meeting many an obstacle. And I don't know that I would have had the willpower to keep going against such obstacles.
And
so I didn't.
Other reasons reasons that they say it's most of personal choices. The several factors that have been cited in the literature for the observed gender disparity in anesthesia leadership and faculty positions, and there are happening events like the British Journal of Anesthesia Special Issue latest March this year, and the Lancet in 2019 in February. The ESA, the European Society, also promoted and elected a gender equity committee. So that's a way of getting arousal.
Yes, I've come to realize, it took me a long time to realize that this was necessary, but I've come to realize that it is necessary for societies in which there's a shortage of women in any specialty. They have to make some initial moves to increase the number of women. And that's what surgery in Britain was very slow to do. I didn't experience it in anesthesia, but surgery took a long time to realize it.
You realize it is.
But in the last 20 years, and the way they broke through in surgery was in Britain because a few women who had succeeded against all odds formed a national society to set up standards to increase the number of women in general surgery. So I realized that it is necessary sometimes to take extraordinary steps to encourage women to partake in any specific area where the shortage of them.
And put it in the mediatic agenda. It's the need that put this topic, this issue in the mediatic agenda. You at the British Journal, by dedicating a special issue on women leadership and women in anesthesia, is getting the focus on that topic to make the scientific community arousal.
Aware, yes, so, that's right. And you've got to keep that interest, you know, it's not just a one-off event. You've got to keep getting the message there. I mean, there are still challenges for women in many parts of the world. I know that. And especially in academic medicine, and especially be it anesthesia or any other specialty. And I think one of the biggest challenges in academic medicine is that it's very difficult to succeed in part-time work in academic anesthesia or any other academic area of medicine. And I've not got the answer to that even yet in Britain. So we have anesthetic academic training programs which you can undertake at the end of your training before you become a consultant. But I haven't found a solution yet to the part-time element of that, because I think when you're doing especially clinical research, it's very difficult to do it 2.5, 3 days a week. Because like often you've got
a way of living. It is a way of living.
You've got to be there when the case comes up that's suitable to study, you know. And even if you're given time in lieu, it's difficult. It's difficult to get all your family arrangements sorted. Just
that's the topic. Yeah, that's the topic that I would like to. This is a very tricky topic. I'm a male anesthetist. That I don't want to be misunderstood, but the work-life demands may pose a challenge for women in anesthesia because of.
Well, of course, since European Working Time Initiative reduced the number of hours that you could work in a week to 48, it made it much easier for women. And I saw that in the generation immediately younger than me, 10 years younger than me.
How many hours did you work in a week?
Oh, well, I mean, in a census, the British census in 2000, I said I worked 60 hours a week. 60. But not all clinical, of course. Yeah. 2/3 of that would be clinical. But I think that it's very difficult to get academic training as a woman if you need a certain amount of time free for your other commitments. And I still don't think anybody has the full solution to that. But I certainly think with reduced hours, and once you get to consultant status in Britain, called part-time contracts, you can do through a minimum. The lowest number you can do is 3.5 days a week equivalent.
But it is not impossible to cope with the familiar responsibility and the work-life familiar balance and be a leader in a position. It's not an impossible task to do that. It's
not impossible, but I think if you want to succeed on a national or international level and you've got family responsibilities, then you have to be very single-minded and you have to have a very good support network at home, because there's going to be times when you can't get home. There's going to be times when you have to work all evening at your desk. And you have got to be very single-minded. I don't even think, I've got no children. I don't think that I would have been able, certainly, to be editor-in-chief of the BJA if I'd have had a big family, a young family, perhaps when they were grown up, yes.
Yes.
But with the workload, pardon?
Not be worried with the chicken pox.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Has fever, yes. And
ill. And some women can cope with that better than I would. I don't for a moment put myself on the pedestal on this front. I don't think I could have done some of the things I've done if I'd have had a young family.
What were the harshest times that you, now that you roll back your career and the leadership that you gained, did you ever felt actively discriminated by your fellows? Did you have a mentorship, someone that would help you progress?
I had very, very good mentors in Liverpool. That was a very important factor in my success. They pushed me forward. They pushed me to do my PhD. They pushed me to
mentors.
Yes,
men.
Yeah, all of them, all but one. There's one lady anesthetist who was a clinician who actually had been widowed as a young woman and left with 4 young children. So she knew what it was to be tough. And she was always directing me and telling me where I was right and when I was wrong. And she was a great influence, just as a clinical role model, not as an academic one. But Professor Utting, the second professor of anesthesia in Liverpool, and Dr. Riding, who past dean of our faculty of anaesthetists, they were great mentors to me. And they told me where to go and what not to do.
Yes.
And of course, I just did it.
You're from the land of the Beatles? You are from the land of the Beatles?
No, I've been working here for a very long time, really.
Who were the fabulous 4 in your career? If you have to choose the fabulous 4 of your career, Professor Hunting, Professor Riding?
Riding and Utting, yes. You know, it depends in which area you're looking. They were the 2 who had a major influence on me. But there was also a professor of veterinary anesthesia in Liverpool who's still alive, Professor Ronald Jones, who also was a major mentor to me on the research and academic front, obviously not on the clinical front. And so he broadened my horizons because there was a big veterinary school in Liverpool and the veterinary anaesthetists were in the same department as the medical anaesthetists.
Yes,
so I used to teach veterinary students, both undergraduates and postgraduates, a lot. And to do veterinary medicine in the UK, you have to have even higher school leaving grades than to do medicine.
Yes.
There are fewer places. So he had another major influence on my life. And then, of course, the British Journal of Anesthesia, there were several men on the board, not just one, but several who encouraged me to move forward with the BJA.
So you don't feel like
a huge amount of support. There's no doubt about that.
But those mentors that gave you the opportunity in the late 70s, the 70s, 80s, it's
80s, 90s, all the way.
Yes, all the way. It was lucky. It was you. How do you look back? And
well, there is a degree of luck in it. I think one of the things that I did right was to move to a huge department centre. To move to Liverpool was to move to a very well-established training centre that had links throughout the world, especially through the Commonwealth. But even the first professor of anaesthesia in Liverpool, Cecil Gray, who was retired by the time I got there, he had links with Oporto going back to the 1950s. You know, he used to sail from Liverpool to Oporto. So the links went round the world. So that is a very important factor. To go to a major established department, recognized for training, but recognized academically for research as well. Because in a way, I just walked into the world of neuromuscular pharmacology. You know, it wasn't me who developed all this. I was given the option of being involved with it, and it was a great honor. And I was the luck came that as I was finishing my training and my last and starting academic training, in effect, atracurium and vecuronium became available for preclinical studies. So this was 1979, 1980.
Yeah.
And those two drugs were launched in the UK in 81, by which time I was working on them very hard indeed. And in fact, they kept me going for the whole of the 1980s research-wise. I got interested in the pharmacodynamics and, as you say, the pharmacokinetics in diseased states with neuromuscular blocking drugs. The old ones, even pancuronium and tubercularium were there then atracurium and vecuronium, and then we saw the two groups, the aminosteroids and the benzyl isoquinoniums, developed into newer, safer, shorter acting drugs. So I was just on a bandwagon by then.
Yes, you were on the spotlight of neuromuscular.
Yes, and so, but of course you've got to keep at it. You can't just say I've done enough. But I was enjoying it. So, you know, it just expanded my knowledge every time a new drug came along. And still, I find it exciting if a new drug comes along that's a neuromuscular blocking drug or an antagonist, you know. It gives me a kick.
Yes.
But I'm very fortunate that I have that strong background academically in this area. So the teachings of Cecil Gray were poured through Jonathan into me, you know, and so I was very fortunate to have that heritage. And I think that's an important part. Train in a major academic center.
And always incentivized to be publishing and doing research and
academic life in the UK, I'm sure it's the same everywhere. You sink or swim. If you're not raising grants and publishing work, you won't be employed for much longer, or you certainly won't get promotion.
Yeah.
So the pressure is on. But I realized as I'd finished my training that I didn't just want to be a consultant anaesthetist. I wanted to give anesthetics. I wanted to do that well, but I wanted to be involved with teaching and research.
You have this tripod. You have the clinical activity, you have the teaching, and also the research. And you managed to none of the tripods were more highlighted than the other. You have 33% of your time.
Those are different parts of my career. Perhaps you could say that at different parts of my career, different parts were more important. I mean, when I was editing the journal, that was my life, you know. And when I say life, I mean all of it.
Please talk us about, it's the first, and I don't know if it does the last to have here with us, past editor-in-chief and chairman of one of the major scientific journals in anesthesia. So it was like a full-time job being an editor.
Well, then I took over from Graham Smith, who was the professor in Leicester, who was extremely successful in the role. He said to me, this will take 28 hours a week of your time on top of the rest of your work. And he was right. It was surprisingly accurate. And it did take that time. Well, of course, a lot of that time was at the weekends and in the evenings. Yeah. But I tried to do 4 or 5 hours a day in my office at the journal, and the rest of the other half of the day doing clinical work or teaching. But in fact, the problem was when I went away, I couldn't anyway, go away for 2 weeks holiday without taking a pile of manuscripts with me to edit.
Manuscripts with you.
Yeah, the accepted ones that needed editing, you know. It never leaves you. It never leaves you.
But what were the main challenges or difficulties what were the harshest times besides of the time-consuming activity and the 20?
Well, I mean, it's a bit too much work to say you actually enjoy it.
Yeah.
But it's probably the proudest part of my working life. I mean, it's the thing that I feel most proud of from the working life, to have edited the journal. Because you're educating yourself as well as everybody else, because you're editing manuscripts in areas that you don't have expertise in. I wasn't a cardiac anaesthetist, but I was having to look at manuscripts about cardiac anesthesia and similarly about neonatal anesthesia. So it's a marvelous education. And you meet a host, you know people by name and work who you've never met.
Yeah.
And then you go to meetings, and hopefully we will do in the future.
The editor-in-chief of the BGA, the editor-in-chief of the BGA, the editor-in-chief has the red carpet in all scientific venues.
I wouldn't go that far, but no, I mean, it's a great honor as well. It's a great honor, you know. But of course, there are times when, I mean, you know, it's not a smooth ride every day. One thing Graham Smith said to me as I took over from him is, he said, every night when you go to bed thinking, I have done as much as I can to keep up with the work, because tomorrow you'll be sure there'll be another pile. And you must never go to bed until you've done as much as you can. And I tried to practice that, but you can imagine that it takes over your life.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why you couldn't do it for your whole working career. You know?
Yeah, but that is the workload.
I mean, yes,
that is the workload of the title, right? of the job of being editor-in-chief. When
you've got to be a workaholic to a certain.
Yes.
You've got to be.
When I was talking about difficulties, I was talking about scientific ethics and scientific those big issues like plagiarism, like
well, interestingly enough, the ethics of scientific publishing started to become interesting at about the time I became editor-in-chief. There was an explosion in interest in it, partly, you know, because of the introduction of electronic submission of manuscripts. It became a bit easier. Once we got laptop computers and could cut and paste, things like plagiarism and redundant publication and dual publication became much easier. And I was just at the beginning of all that. So that's very interesting. But if you get one episode of plagiarism, it takes up hours of your time to sort out. And you'll all know, I'm not going to name names, but there have been occasional cases of very infamous plagiarism and redundant publication, and even making up data. And they take us time, an editor-in-chief's time. Interesting work.
And sufferment, and not time, but also we think we are the face of this major institution that is this international scientific journal, and we have to retract, and we have to be the head of leading on these uncharted waters at the time.
And there's very great cultural differences around the world in the attitude to things like plagiarism and redundant publication. Some countries hardly think it's wrong. And not only far away from us, but even across Europe, there are different social attitudes to this.
How do you manage before the electronic era to detect plagiarism? It's
of course, a good reviewer who knows the field will be your best hope of picking it up early. So, I mean, this has happened to me only relatively recently. You see a manuscript and you think, I've seen this as a reviewer for another journal. So that's the best hope that an editor-in-chief has, that the reviewer will put you on red alert. But quite often, an editor-in-chief from another journal will contact you, say, I've got a manuscript here that I've had a red light from a reviewer saying, I've seen this manuscript already and it's being published in another journal. So you've got to have a good network of contacts. I mean, the editors-in-chief of all the anesthetic journals try to meet a couple of times a year, you know, both usually at the ASA meeting and one other meeting, usually Euro Anesthesia, to discuss such matters. But that can take up a lot of time. But I do stress it's quite interesting work.
It is.
If you had all the time in the world, and Steve Schaefer, past editor of A&A, of course, has developed a huge interest in this over the Bolt saga, you know.
One topic that was on Twitter, I know that you, Professor Jennifer, also have I follow you on Twitter, and one of the topics of 2 weeks ago was the peer reviewing process because they were discussing here in Portugal that peer reviewing, it's a job that is very honorable, but it takes lots of time. And to
Yes.
a good peer review, you spend 8 to 10 hours of your...
It depends. It varies a lot.
Yes.
You know, if I get a straightforward neuromuscular manuscript, it will only take me 2 or 3 hours.
Yes.
But if I get one with a massive statistical exercise in, yes, 4 or 5 hours.
Would you...
Actually, I take the approach that I only give a finite amount of time to certain manuscripts. If I think a manuscript has got no chance of being published in that specific journal, I'm not going to spend 10 hours on it.
Yes.
I'm going to try and succinctly highlight the weaknesses of it. Then say no.
One thing that it was discussed, and I read some articles from the Guardian, that the scientific industry, the medical scientific paper industry, has revenues higher than Facebook's and Google's. It's an interesting article from the Guardian, and one thing that it was discussing on the social networks, it was if it's supposed to be a paid job. Do you think that peer reviewing should be a paid job?
Yes, I know that's been topical. Well, interestingly, when I started as editor-in-chief, we used to pay reviewers just £15 for each review they did, which didn't in any way recognize the hours spent. It was more then, of course, than it is now. But when we introduced electronic manuscript submission in the late 1990s, it was impossible with the first sets of software to work out how many reviews any one reviewer had done. And so we had to stop paying reviewers at that point. Now, in fact, it's been raised again recently, because in this world, I'm afraid the next generation have a different attitude to money from my generation or those older than me.
Better or worst?
Well, I'm not judging that. It's just different. I mean, I can't imagine Cecil Gray or John Etting ever finding it acceptable to be paid for the honor of reviewing a manuscript. But these days, people want to be paid for everything, and you just have to accept that. The younger generation expect to be paid for all that they do. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying it's different.
It's different, yes.
Yeah.
And you were for 8 years editor-in-chief, the harshest but most proud years, as you said, of your career. And then you moved to be chairman of the board of the British Journal.
Yes, yes. Well, I think it's helpful if the chairman of the BJA board has been an editor, not perhaps the editor-in-chief, but I think it's only when you've been an editor that you can fully understand the challenges of the job.
Like, before you being a CEO, you have to work.
Yeah, you've got to come up through the ropes. Yes. And I think a chairman who knows what it's like is going to be more considerate and supportive to the editor. And Graham Smith had become chairman. Quite a few of the editors-in-chief of the BJA historically had become chairman of the board after. So it was a recognized pathway. Wasn't by any means the first.
You chose your advisors. You chose the advisors on your board.
Did you say you chose the advisors?
Yeah, I was asking if you were the one as a chairman, you were the one that you have the responsibility of choosing the advisors, or were they candidates?
The BJA is a charity, so it has to adhere to charitable law in Britain. And so within the board of the journal of 25 or so people, there are some trustees or directors, as we call them now, who are responsible for the management of the journal. And by which I don't mean the production of an issue, I mean managing the funds of that charity and employing the right people. Inviting people onto the BJA board is done with a view to them becoming editors one day, becoming directors of the journal. And so the management job as a chairman is only about a third of the work of the editor-in-chief, but it's a very different work, because then you're managing a group of highly intelligent individuals, most of them academic. And they all think they know the right answer, you know. And so it has its completely different challenges, actually. It requires a different mindset from being editor-in-chief.
Yeah, more diplomatic.
But I was so involved with the journal by then that I wanted to.
I would like to ask you a question that it is, do you had, and now linking to our first topic, do you had to put your women skills of diplomacy and to conciliate all the members with big egos and big opinions?
I'm not terribly good at that, I don't think. I knew when as the first woman to go on that board, that I had to make it work. I knew that when I was going on, I was going to be the first of many women, and there are many more women on the board now, but I had a full awareness of the fact that I could not fail.
Yeah.
And that applied, especially when I was editor-in-chief. But I never felt any antagonism to me as a woman on the board, really.
You didn't have to.
When more and more people of my generation and younger came on, of course, they were my main professional friends, because most of the board members were in similar jobs to me with similar challenges and frustrations. So they became my main clinical friends, as academic friends.
You didn't have to untie the knots. Imagine that you have 12 chair advisors against and 12 in favor, and you had to
that was never a big problem. Yeah. I mean, there were thorny issues, undoubtedly. Every chairman has to endure some difficult challenges, but they weren't challenges with individuals on the board. They were more challenges with the publishers, you know, and the relationship with the college and this sort of thing.
Is there a public side of being editor-in-chief of the BGA?
Yes, I mean, it's important for the anesthetic fraternity to know who the editor-in-chief is. And it's important for them to feel you're approachable. And because some of my predecessors weren't perhaps as approachable, I tried to change that image a bit. I wanted people to feel, you know, that they could.
The lay people?
No, I mean, anesthetists, I mean, all trainees and consultants, everyone. Yeah, they mustn't feel intimidated by the editor-in-chief of the journal. But they must feel they can ask him anything.
But being the responsible of such an impactful paper has also political impact. If Professor Jennifer Hunter says that not wearing a mask, I'm just doing this caricature. You had a strong opinion, public opinion. So
I wish it was like that somewhat, but I think one of the things I've enjoyed about my clinical work and my academic work is you can't get away with saying anything that's rubbish. You know, you've got to be able to prove your point. I worked in intensive care for a very long time, and doing ward rounds with 4 other consultants and anesthetists. You were on your toes, you know. You couldn't slip into any second-rate practices. You couldn't say anything that wasn't true.
And I've
enjoyed that.
And you had to say that I have to read more. I don't know. Yeah. I'm a professor. I don't know, but I have to read tomorrow. We will discuss on that topic.
Oh, I think it's important to admit when you don't know. Very important in every area of life. You've got to have the confidence in yourself, of course, to say you don't know. But no, I haven't felt in any way. That might be a slight difference between men and women, actually. But I don't think women perhaps are feared in the same way as men are when they're at the senior positions.
But you didn't have as you said, to be the first women in the board, the first women editor-in-chief, the stress of having to have an answer to every question.
No, not really.
You coped you coped well with that.
I didn't sit there thinking I was a woman as opposed to man. I didn't go about any of my work thinking that. Oh. Just occasionally, if a very handsome man came into the room, I might think twice. But that wasn't that common. And it certainly didn't occupy a lot of my time when I was chairing the BJA board. I just didn't think about it, to be quite honest. I was where I wanted to be. I was doing what I enjoyed.
In times like these ones that we are living in COVID-19 pandemic, one thing that is on the top of the news and the discussion is that the quality of science that has been being published, and lots of guidelines, lots of articles, some of them contradicting themselves. It was the hydroxychloroquine hype, and then and now the dexamethasone from Oxford also. And one thing that the lay people and the social media wanted were the experts. They wanted to hear the experts. So being in a position like you were, Professor Jennifer were, it's like being in a like an authority to it. So
well, the challenge over COVID has been that, of course, none of us have had any authority in this area. None of us have been expert. And that's part of the challenge. It's been quite a unique challenge for the present editorial team, because suddenly you're inundated, especially with correspondence, but also, as you hint, rather low-grade academic research papers, because, of course, everybody suddenly gets terribly excited and overreacts and starts spilling out. Even the major journals, you know, even the New England Journal of Medicine has been criticized for some of the work it's published over COVID.
The quest for
it's just
sorry to interrupt you.
It's an overreaction, and it's a normal human response. But I do think, and I do have thought this for the last few weeks, that it's time for editors across all the journals to pull back a bit now. Because for one thing, there's a lot of replication in what's being published about COVID now. There are, I agree, controversies as well, but we now need more substantial prospective research to be analysed correctly and in depth before it's published. But every journal has sinned on this front.
Yes, I know that you have seen our last digital meeting with Professor Paulo Pelozzi and Dr. Pedro Amorim, and one thing that we've discussed was the quality of the science that has been being published in these times, and because the competition for the likes and for to being the first paper to announce the golden pill, and this is like a chain reaction, and now
this is a responsibility for editors-in-chief. They've got to be able to judge it. These are skills which you're not trained in, you know. A lot of them are common sense, but because you're so busy all the time, it's sometimes difficult to stand back and think, now what are we doing here? You know? And the journal used to have a retreat once a year to stop and think over a couple of days for the board to think about what we were doing. But the editor-in-chief has to do it mainly. And it is time for all editors-in-chief now.
Can I pose you a challenge? And now is Professor Hemmings the editor-in-chief, but imagine that you had to select the next issue of BGA, next month each, or probably not the next, but the September issue. Let's do this. What would be the topic that you would choose to the next issue, in line with what you said, that now we need a break from the infodemic?
Yes. An editor-in-chief can only choose from the manuscripts that he and his co-editors have accepted. So you don't have an infinite choice. Every month you have a pile in front of you of accepted manuscripts, and you have to bring them together. This is actually one of the more enjoyable aspects of the job, collating an issue each month. And what I always wanted was a spread of information, because after all, this is a general journal. It's not a pediatric anesthetic journal or a cardiac anesthetic journal. So you want a spread of interest. You want to try and find something in that issue for everyone, so that when every anaesthetist opens that month's issue, they see something that attracts them. So in other words, you don't want too much on the one area. Now, Professor Hemmings has developed these special issues, in addition to the main content, which are online mainly, to give more specific interests. But what I want is a spread of issues. And also, and this is me speaking personally, I didn't want the same old thing over and over again, be it COVID or the difficult airway or even neuromuscular blockade. Yes. What interested me was when something came along which was completely different, and you want to try and pick those out. You also want to be there at the beginning, as with COVID. So I understand entirely the emotions that have been engendered over COVID.
Yeah, which was the issue that you edited that you are most proud of? You remember?
I don't think there's one issue. I don't think there's one issue, because no one issue is perfect. Some are better than others, but no one issue will ever stand out in your mind. The interesting thing about being an editor-in-chief is that this might be July, but you will have put July together at the end of April. And at the moment, you would be thinking about September or October's issue. So when you think about an issue, actually, you have to think twice about which month it actually was, because you're working 2 or 3 months ahead in the contents list.
You were not worried with the agenda. For instance, Women in Anesthesia special issue was launched in March. In March, yes. And you try to cope that with the mediatic agenda to increase the visibility of that issue.
Well, it was released on International Women's Day, March the 8th, you see. That was the reason. It wasn't my idea to do that. Christa Burr, who's a professor in Amsterdam, who's one of the editors in Professor Hemmings' team, that was her idea, together with a few of the other women now on the BJ board.
Yeah.
But so it wasn't originally my idea, but because I was the only woman who'd ever been an editor-in-chief of a major anesthetic journal, I was brought in to be one of the editorial team for that. Yeah. But it wasn't primarily my idea. I mustn't accept that. I mean, it's not, I'm much more excited by neuromuscular blockade than the science behind women in medicine.
One of the major revolutions that happened in anesthesia was published in BGA, the first paper of Archie Brain with laryngeal mass.
It was, yeah, it was. Graham Smith was editor in then, early 1992. Yes, that was a great asset to the journal. You'll probably know that Archie Brain was turned down by 3 major pharmaceutical companies for the development of that. No. Portex actually turned down his prototype. Yes. He had to go to a small provincial manufacturer near Reading, where he was based, to get them to make that. But Portex turned it down. And so did 2 other companies. But the BJA was offered the first show of that. And that was a major kudos. And the train of thought twitch technique, Ali Uttingen Gray, 1970-71, a series of 3 papers first published in the BJA and still quoted.
In which topic? Sorry, I cannot understand. Which one? Which topic?
3 papers, train of thought twitch technique for neuromuscular monitoring. Came out of Liverpool before my time, 1971. Ali Uttingen Gray, and they've given a lot of mileage to the BJA as well. We have on 2 occasions, certainly when I was editor, the journal celebrated 75 years, and we searched out the 50 most quoted papers from the BJA. And Cedric Priest-Roberts' sympathetic response to tracheal intubation, was one of the top ones, obtunding the cardiovascular response. And there was a lot of John Dundee's papers on intravenous anesthetic agents in there. And of course the Mapleson.
When you discover those Cristiano Ronaldo's that give you one major impact article, how is it to when you receive a manuscript from the same author, do you feel like pressed to go, now I have to do the reviewing as it would be an unknown, or do you feel pressed to having a second paper on Archie Brains? And
oh yes, well, it's good for any journal to have specific areas of interest. And in the 90s, when I was editor, the laryngeal mass papers were coming in all the time from around the world. But you have to prevent the journal getting full of one topic.
Yes.
But the topic at the moment is COVID, but it'll change, and in a few years' time, it'll be something completely different. And of course, I dare say for the editors, when atracurium and vecuronium came out, when I was just a young kid on the block, then they couldn't stop getting papers about those two new drugs. And in the 90s, of course, we also got an awful lot of papers about postoperative nausea and vomiting on Danceltron came out, and all that work. We even had a supplement in the early 90s in the BJA, which David Rowbottom edited, which was hugely successful. Glaxo bought hundreds of thousands of copies of it. A full supplement of
moving a little from I always forgot to tell the audience that if they want, they can pose questions, because I'm monitoring here if there are any questions. But to people that are listening, if you want, you can send by YouTube, and we will pose it. But we're switching topic now. You said that you have this reference, like Professor John Notting, Professor Riding. What are the competencies that you recognize as an excellency in anesthesia? Which are the common features that you look back to your mentors, to the people that influence you most in the way that you tap? What are the competencies of an excellent anesthetist?
Yes, well, of course, they've got to be a role model. And that's what I tried subsequently to do myself. And the characteristics of a good role model, well, there are many aspects to it. And this came up in the Women in Anesthesia special issue, because they're slightly different for women, I think, than for men. But for male every role model works hard and competently. Caring, compassion, competence. Those big 3 C's have got to be demonstrated in a leader to be successful. Caring, competence.
Incompetence.
Yes. And you've got to be able to be seen on the shop floor to be doing your job well. You've got to be there plenty of the time. A head of department should be in there first in the morning and out last. And they've also, and I learned this from my father, he was always very keen to teach us all. That you treat everybody with respect and the same. From my own father, he used to say, everybody's the same in this world. Treat everybody with respect, whether the cleaner or the professor. Everybody deserves the same sort of. And John Nutting was extremely good at that. He was a gentleman in every way. So I think you have to check now. Of course, in Britain, we do not have a very hierarchical structure within the health service. So the leader has to be seen to be able to be as good at his job as anyone else clinically, but also, of course, to be a good teacher. And it's also to encourage those who are younger than them, to make those in your department feel that that they are wanted and that they are an important part of the department. Make them feel that you know what their problems and their challenges are.
to be excellent and to be a leader is skills that you can get trained on.
Well, yes, I think you've got to try and work. You've got to consciously give time to training on it. Some people have more innate skills than others. Everybody has their weaknesses. Do you know the thing that I found most difficult to deal with was laziness? Because most of the doctors that I work with had more than enough intelligence to do the job.
Mm-hmm.
Not all have had as much common sense as others, but getting an intelligent, lazy trainee to perform optimally in an academic situation is very difficult. It's no use going into academic life if you're lazy. Yes. Not at all.
That's
because I think the saying that it's 99% slog. Do you say that in Portugal? We 99... say 99% slog and 1% inspiration. That's
yes, the sweat.
Academic life.
Yes,
it's, yeah. 99% slog. And if you haven't got that work ethic, then it's very difficult to make someone develop it, actually. And it's very difficult to make them develop it. And in academic life, it's no use at all.
Yes, yes. So we are moving to our almost with an hour now and we are very British in the starting and the ending time. So we have to be very respectful.
I speak to Portugal quite a lot, you know. I know what the timekeeping is like.
but only for the sun and only for the port wine and for the Dodo. And as a common feature on these meetings, I asked Professor Jennifer to choose one recommendation, a final recommendation, so to share with us. And I will now share my screen because Professor Jennifer recommends a poem by a philosopher, a metaphysicist from the late 16th century, John Donne, D-O-N-N-N-E. And No Man is an Island. So I will try, if I don't try to share my screen.
British John Donne. We say Donne, even though it's spelled D-O-N-N-E. Yeah. We say John Donne. Very famous.
Yes, she was a priest also. Yes, and as I found the poem in this. I don't know. Are you seeing my? No?
No, I can't see it yet. No,
but I will try to. Let me see. I found one website that it says Poem Hunter, and I thought, now this is the site that I will show because I even think it was Professor Hunter that was managing this. But I'm not able to share my screen. But if it's poemhunter.com, No Man is an Island, and I will read the poem with a special musical background that you all recognize. Of course, we were talking about Liverpool, and No Man is an Island by John Donne. No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less. As well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manner of thy friends, or of thine own were. Any man's death diminished me, because I'm involved in mankind, and therefore never sent to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. John Doe with Let It Be from the Beatles as a background. Why this poem, Professor Hunter?
Well, it's partly because I've been involved with Europe in the we haven't got to my contributions with the ESA, but I feel that I've visited Portugal many times. I've visited large parts of Europe, and no man is an island. We're all in this together. We're all got the same challenges. We've all got the same problems. We've all got the same interests. And so I don't want you to think that I feel any separate from all the anaesthetists in Portugal. I don't. I feel we're all in this together.
It's a very political content in the times that we are facing.
Yes. That's another reason for choosing it, despite Brexit and everything else.
Yes.
As far as my specialty goes in medicine, we're all together.
We are all together. And to finish, we could finish also with the soccer, because Liverpool has been the champion. Yes, and
become the winners of the.
Yesterday, Porto, my favorite football club, also was yesterday Portuguese champion. So we could end it with the motto of Liverpool Football Club: to our women in anesthesia, we will never walk alone. So it's like the wrapping up, the take-home message for all the women that are listening to us.
Yes.
They will never walk alone. Professor Hunter, I'm so pleased and so honored to have the opportunity to be with you, chatting and learning.
It's very kind of you. Very kind of you to invite me. I wish you well, all of you. I wish you all as well.
Hope to see
I hope to get back to Porto one day.
Yes. Hope to see you here in Portugal in a near future, so we could, or in ESA, where we can meet physical together, just to acknowledge all that you share. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you that are at home listening. See you in next month in next digital meeting. Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.